If she dies here, it's on all of you." A man's voice rang out, firm and clear, while the crowd only knew how to hold up phones and record. He knelt down and began CPR, sweat and sand covering his hands. Someone laughed mockingly. "Single dad thinks he's a doctor?" The sarcasm spread through the circle of onlookers. A little girl beside him clutched the old leather bracelet on her father's wrist, whispering prayers. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Heavy silence pressed down. Then the sound of water sputtering out. The girl coughing hard, her chest rising and falling again. The crowd held its breath. Phones lowered, mockery vanished. No one suspected that the girl who had just been brought back to life was a billionaire heiress, and this moment would forever change the lives of 3 people. Daniel Hayes was 36 years old, European, a single father with a lean build and eyes that were determined yet humble. He always wore an old leather bracelet, the only memento left after his wife died in an accident. His daughter Emma was 8 years old with blonde hair, innocent but perceptive, who loved drawing sunflowers and sticking smiley face stickers on her father's lunchboxes. Daniel lived simply, working as a mechanical technician, dedicating everything to his daughter, never dating again. For Emma's birthday, he took her to the beach, a small but warm gift. The beach was crowded, laughter and conversation echoing everywhere. Suddenly, a young woman collapsed on the sand, unconscious. The crowd only gathered to record videos, a few people panicking and shouting. Daniel handed Emma to a drink stand worker. "Watch my daughter. I have to help." He rushed over, knelt down, and began CPR, sand sticking to his shirt, sweat pouring down, his leather bracelet soaked with seawater. Mocking voices rose up. "Single dad thinks he's a doctor?" The humiliation echoed through the circle of onlookers. Daniel remained steadfast, whispering, "Come on, fight back." The girl coughed suddenly. Breathing returned. The crowd fell silent. As Daniel worked, muscle memory from a first aid course he'd taken years ago kicked in. He'd learned CPR when Emma was born, terrified that something might happen to her and he wouldn't know how to help. The woman was young, probably in her late 20s, wearing expensive clothes that were now soaked with seawater and covered in sand. But none of that mattered. She was someone's daughter, someone who deserved a chance to live. "Call an ambulance," Daniel shouted to the crowd, never stopping his compressions. "And someone get a towel." A few people finally snapped out of their filming trance and began to help. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The woman's eyes fluttered open just as the paramedics arrived. She looked confused, disoriented, but alive. Her gaze found Daniel's face and she tried to speak. "Don't try to talk," Daniel said gently. "You're safe now. The medics are here." As the paramedics took over, Daniel stepped back, his shirt soaked through with sweat and seawater. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of having just saved someone's life. Emma had been watching from the drink stand, and now she ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Daddy, you were so brave," she whispered. "I just did what anyone should do, sweetheart." "But not everyone did it. Only you." The paramedics loaded the woman onto a stretcher. As they prepared to leave, she turned her head and caught Daniel's eye one more time. She mouthed the words, "Thank you," before disappearing into the ambulance. The crowd began to disperse, some still filming, others discussing what they just witnessed. Daniel heard fragments of conversation, some admiring his quick action, others still skeptical about a random guy performing medical procedures. "Come on, Em," Daniel said, picking up their beach bag. "Let's go home." As they walked back to their car, Emma slipped her small hand into his. "Daddy, why did some people laugh at you?" Daniel considered his answer carefully. Sometimes when people don't understand something, they make fun of it instead of trying to help. That's not very nice. No, it's not. But we can't control what other people do. We can only control what we do. A trace of authenticity. Emma ran to hug her father tightly, sobbing, "I was scared I'd lose you. Like I lost Mommy." Daniel held his daughter, his hand touching the leather bracelet, whispering, "Daddy's here." That evening, as they sat on their small apartment balcony eating birthday cake, Emma asked, "Do you think the lady is okay?" "I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so." Neither of them knew that this simple act of compassion would change their lives forever. The ambulance took the woman away. Daniel and Emma gave their statements and left. That evening, the hospital called. The woman wanted to meet the man who saved her life. In the white hospital room, the woman had regained consciousness, her eyes filled with gratitude. Isabella Hale, 29 years old. She whispered, "Why didn't you just leave me there?" Daniel replied, "Because I once lost someone I loved, when no one stopped to help." Isabella noticed the worn leather bracelet and asked about its story. He told her his wife had given it to him on their wedding day, and it was the only thing he had left of her. Emma drew a picture, her father, herself, and a sunflower, giving it to Isabella. She was moved to tears. They talked for a long time. For the first time, Isabella felt peace that didn't come from money. When Daniel left, Emma whispered, "I'll come back to visit you." Isabella spent the next few days in the hospital, ostensibly for observation, but really because she didn't want to return to her empty mansion. The nurses were kind but professional. Daniel and Emma's visit had been the only genuine human connection she'd experienced in months. She found herself thinking about Daniel's story, how he'd learned CPR after becoming a single father, how he'd lost his wife in an accident where no one had stopped to help. The parallel wasn't lost on her. When Daniel and Emma returned the next day, Isabella was sitting up in bed, looking much better. "How are you feeling?" Daniel asked. "Physically? Much better. Emotionally?" She paused. "That's more complicated." Emma climbed onto the chair beside the bed, immediately making herself at home. "Did you like my drawing?" "I love it. It's hanging right there on my wall. Daddy says sunflowers always turn toward the sun. That's why I like to draw them." Isabella looked at Daniel. "That's beautiful wisdom." "Emma's full of wisdom. Sometimes I think she's the adult and I'm the child." Over the next hour, Isabella learned about their simple but rich life. Daniel worked steady hours at a manufacturing plant, making enough to provide for Emma, but not much more. They lived in a modest apartment, cooked dinner together every night, and read stories before bed. "It sounds wonderful," Isabella said wistfully. "It is," Daniel replied simply. "We have what we need." Isabella had never heard someone speak with such contentment about having enough. In her world, enough was never enough. There was always more to acquire, more to achieve, more to prove. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said. "When you saw me on the beach unconscious, why was your first instinct to help? Most people just watched." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "When my wife died, she was in a car accident. She was alive when the first people arrived, but no one knew CPR. No one tried. By the time paramedics got there, it was too late." Isabella felt her chest tighten. "I'm so sorry. I learned CPR the next week. I swore that if I was ever in a position to help someone, I wouldn't hesitate, even if it meant looking foolish in front of strangers. Especially then. Pride is a luxury when someone's life is at stake." Emma had been quietly coloring in her book, but now she looked up. "Daddy saved you because that's what heroes do. They help people even when it's scary." Isabella smiled at the little girl. "Your daddy is definitely a hero." "I know. He's my hero every day." The simple love between father and daughter was unlike anything Isabella had witnessed. Her own relationship with her father was built on expectations, conditions, and business strategy. "Isabella," Emma said seriously, "are you lonely?" The question caught Isabella off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you look like how Daddy looked after Mommy died. Sad, but trying not to show it." Daniel started to redirect his daughter, but Isabella held up a hand. "She's very perceptive," Isabella said. "Yes, sweetheart. I am lonely sometimes." "Well, you don't have to be lonely anymore. You can be our friend." Isabella felt tears she hadn't expected. "I'd like that very much." When visiting hours ended and Daniel and Emma prepared to leave, Isabella felt a familiar emptiness settling in. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, trying not to sound desperate. "If you'd like us to," Daniel said. "I would." "Very much." After they left, Isabella stared at Emma's drawing taped to her wall. 3 figures standing in sunshine, a father, a daughter, and now her. For the first time in years, she was part of someone's picture of happiness. A trace of authenticity. The nurse spoke quietly to Daniel. Her whole family hasn't come to visit. You're the only person she's wanted to see. That comment haunted Daniel as he drove home. He couldn't imagine having money and power, but no one who genuinely cared about your well-being. It made him hold Emma a little tighter that night, grateful for the love they shared despite having so little materially. Isabella, meanwhile, lay in her hospital bed thinking about the leather bracelet Daniel wore, a symbol of love that transcended death. She wondered what it would feel like to be loved so completely that someone would carry a piece of you forever. For the first time in her adult life, Isabella was more interested in understanding love than accumulating wealth. The news broke. Heiress Isabella Hale collapses, saved by mystery single dad. Paparazzi hunted Daniel down. Co-workers mocked him for chasing fame. Isabella came to his house to apologize for the media attention. The Hale family pressured Isabella to appear with her arranged fiancé to quash rumors. Isabella refused. A life-saving debt isn't a PR tool. The fiancé and his security came to Daniel's house, threatening, "Stay away from her. You're just a poor nobody." Daniel remained calm. "Your money can't buy the breath I gave back to her." Isabella dared to say no to her family for the first time. "I won't go back to someone I don't love." After they left, Isabella broke down. "You see, I have nothing except the money they give me." Daniel placed his leather bracelet in her hand. "Keep this. It once helped me stand up whenever I felt hopeless." Daniel received an anonymous email. "If you keep involving yourself with her, you'll lose your job." Real pressure from the corporation. The media frenzy intensified over the following days. Photos of Daniel and Emma appeared in tabloids alongside wild speculation about their relationship with the billionaire heiress. Daniel's co-workers at the plant weren't kind about the attention. "Looks like Hayes found his meal ticket," one of them said loudly during lunch break. "Must be nice saving the right person at the right time," another added. Daniel ignored the comments, but Emma didn't understand why some of her classmates were suddenly treating her differently. "Daddy, why did that man on TV say mean things about us?" she asked one evening. "Some people think they know our story, but they don't. They're just guessing." "Are we famous now?" "I hope not, sweetheart." Famous isn't always good. Meanwhile, Isabella faced intense pressure from her family. Her father, William Hale, had built his empire on controlling narratives and managing appearances. "This situation is unacceptable," he declared during an emergency family meeting. "The press is having a field day with stories about our daughter and some working-class nobody. His name is Daniel, and he saved my life. Irrelevant. You'll announce your engagement to Marcus immediately. That will end this ridiculous speculation." Isabella looked around the boardroom table at faces she'd known her entire life. People who claimed to love her, but were more concerned with stock prices than her happiness. "I won't marry Marcus. I don't love him, and he doesn't love me." "Love is a luxury we can't afford right now," her stepmother interjected. "This family's reputation is at stake." "What about my reputation as a human being? What about my right to choose my own life?" The room fell silent. Isabella had never spoken back to them like this before. 2 days later, Marcus arrived at Daniel's apartment building with 2 security guards. They found Daniel in the parking lot, coming home from work. "You need to disappear," Marcus said without preamble. "Isabella has obligations you couldn't possibly understand." "The only obligation she has is to herself," Daniel replied calmly. "You think this is some fairy tale? That love conquers all?" Marcus laughed coldly. "You're a mechanic with a kid. She's worth $9 billion. Do the math." "I'm not doing math. I'm just being a friend to someone who needed one." "Friend?" Marcus stepped closer. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know what you're really after." Daniel felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "You know what I'm really after? I want Emma to grow up believing that people help each other because it's right, not because of what they can get in return." "How noble. How naive." "Maybe. But I sleep well at night." The threat was clear, even without being spoken directly. Daniel's job, his apartment lease, Emma's school, everything could be affected by people with enough money and influence. That evening, Isabella showed up at Daniel's door, visibly upset. I heard about Marcus, she said. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. It's not your fault that some people think money gives them the right to control others. But it is my fault that you're being dragged into my family's dysfunction. Emma appeared in the doorway. Isabella, did you come for dinner? Daddy made spaghetti. Isabella looked at Daniel, uncertain. You're always welcome here, Daniel said simply. Over dinner, Isabella watched the easy interaction between father and daughter. Emma chattered about her day at school, showed off a loose tooth, and insisted on demonstrating her latest drawing technique. This is what family dinner looks like, Isabella thought. Not strategic discussions about mergers and acquisitions, not carefully orchestrated conversations designed to maintain appearances. Isabella, Emma said, twirling spaghetti on her fork, are you going to marry that mean man? Emma, Daniel warned gently. It's okay, Isabella said. No, sweetheart. I'm not going to marry him. Good. He has mean eyes. Daddy says you can tell a lot about people by their eyes. After Emma went to bed, Daniel and Isabella sat on his small balcony, looking out at the city lights. I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital, Isabella said, about learning CPR after your wife died. What about it? You turned your tragedy into something that could help others. You didn't let it make you bitter or closed off. Some days I wanted to, but Emma needed me to be better than my grief. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to be better than my circumstances. I've been trapped in other people's expectations for so long, I don't remember what I actually want. Daniel reached over and took her hand. You start small. You choose one thing that feels true to you, and you do it. Then you choose another. What if I choose wrong? Then you choose again. The beautiful thing about free will is that it doesn't run out. That night, Isabella made her first real choice. She took off the engagement ring Marcus had forced on her finger and left it on her father's desk with a note. I choose differently. The next morning, she moved out of the family mansion and into a modest hotel room. For the first time in her life, she woke up somewhere she had chosen to be. The anonymous threats to Daniel's job materialized the next day. His supervisor called him in for a performance review that was clearly engineered to create grounds for termination. But Daniel had expected this. He'd already spoken with a lawyer and documented the timeline of events. More importantly, he'd realized something. He wasn't fighting for just himself anymore. He was fighting for the right to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and that was a fight worth having. Isabella left the mansion, rented a small apartment, and lived simply for the first time. She began establishing a foundation to support single parents, inspired by Daniel and Emma. Daniel and Emma visited regularly, cooking meals together and sharing dinner. Emma talked about her mother, pointing to the empty chair. Mom used to sit here when she was sad. Isabella was deeply moved. The three of them planted sunflowers together on the balcony. Daniel wore his leather bracelet while holding Isabella's trembling hand. The news reported, Heiress abandons luxury, chooses simple life. Isabella laughed, not caring about the headlines. One evening, Emma asked, Daddy, do you love Isabella? Daniel was silent. Isabella listened, tears falling. He replied softly, If we're not ready yet, we can wait. I'll be here. Isabella's transition to independent life wasn't easy. She'd never paid her own bills, grocery shopped, or done laundry. But each small task felt like a victory over the helplessness she'd felt her entire life. The foundation she established grew quickly. Using her business knowledge and genuine passion for helping families like Daniel and Emma's, she created programs that actually made a difference. I want to help people who are doing everything right but still struggling, she explained to Daniel one evening as they reviewed grant applications. People like you, who work hard and love deeply but don't have safety nets. You're changing lives, Daniel said, looking at the stack of thank you letters from families they'd helped. We're changing lives. Your story inspired this whole thing. Emma had become the unofficial mascot of the foundation. Her sunflower drawings appeared on all their materials, and she insisted on personally approving every family photo used in their promotional materials. I want to make sure they all look happy, she explained with the seriousness of a seasoned art director. The three of them had fallen into a comfortable routine. Isabella would come over for dinner twice a week, and they'd spend Saturdays together, sometimes at the park, sometimes at museums, often just at home doing ordinary things that felt extraordinary to Isabella. One Saturday afternoon, while Emma napped, Daniel and Isabella sat on the small balcony, watching their sunflowers turn toward the late afternoon sun. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said. "Always. Do you think your wife would approve of this? Of us?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah used to say that love wasn't a finite resource, that loving someone new didn't diminish the love you had for someone else. She sounds wise. She was, and she would have loved you. How can you be sure? Because you make Emma laugh, because you see the good in people, because you're brave enough to choose a smaller life if it means a more honest one." Isabella felt tears she hadn't expected. "I've never been called brave before." "Then people haven't been paying attention." Their relationship deepened slowly, built on friendship and shared values rather than passion or convenience. Isabella learned to braid Emma's hair, Daniel taught her to change a tire, and Emma taught them both that families could grow in unexpected ways. One evening, Emma was drawing at the kitchen table while the adults prepared dinner. "Isabella," she said without looking up from her artwork, "I think my mom would like you." Isabella stopped stirring the sauce. "What makes you say that?" "Because you make Daddy remember how to laugh, and you listen to my stories like they're important. Mom always said those were the most important things." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Isabella and Daniel talked about the future for the first time. "I need to be honest about something," Isabella said. "My family isn't going to give up. They'll keep trying to control me, keep pressuring me to come back. Are you tempted?" "Sometimes. When the bills are confusing, or when I mess up something that seems simple to everyone else. It would be easier to go back. But easy isn't the same as right. And I've learned the difference between being taken care of and being cared for." Daniel understood. His life with Emma was never easy. Single parenthood was a constant juggling act. But it was right. It was chosen. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we'll face it together. Even if it gets complicated, even if my family makes things difficult for you and Emma." Especially then. 3 months after Isabella moved out of the mansion, her father made one final attempt to bring her home. He arrived at her apartment with lawyers, financial documents, and ultimatums. "You have 48 hours to end this ridiculous rebellion and come home," he announced, "or you'll be completely cut off financially." Isabella looked around her small apartment, at Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, at the sunflowers growing on the balcony, at the photo of the three of them that had become her most treasured possession. "Dad," she said calmly, "I've already been cut off from everything that matters. The money was just keeping me distracted from noticing." After he left, Isabella sat on her balcony and called Daniel. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified, free, poor, rich all at the same time. Sounds about right. Is this what choosing your own life feels like? Every single day, a trace of authenticity." The evening ended with Emma asking, "Daddy, do you love Isabella?" Daniel was silent while Isabella listened, tears falling. He replied softly, "If we're not ready yet, we can wait. I'll be here." That night, Isabella realized she was ready, not for grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but for the quiet daily choice of building a life with people who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. One morning, Isabella saw Emma's new drawing, 3 people in a sunflower garden with the words, "My family is growing." Isabella was overcome with emotion. For the first time, she felt chosen. She said, "If you two need me, I want to stay." Daniel smiled. "Welcome home." Final image. The bright morning kitchen, Emma laughing, Daniel making coffee, Isabella watering flowers on the balcony. On Daniel's wrist, the old leather bracelet remained, but this time it didn't just remind him of the past, it witnessed a new beginning. 6 months later, their unconventional family had found its rhythm. Isabella had officially been disowned by her family, but had never felt more secure. The foundation she'd started had helped over 200 families and had received national recognition. More importantly, she'd learned what home actually felt like. "I have something to show you both," Emma announced one Sunday morning, producing a large poster she'd been working on secretly. It was a timeline of their story, illustrated with her distinctive sunflower style. The day Daddy saved Isabella was the centerpiece, but surrounding it were dozens of smaller moments. First dinner together, planting flowers, foundation launch, family movie night. "This is our story," she said proudly. "It starts sad but gets happy." Isabella felt tears she didn't try to hide. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect." That afternoon, they received an unexpected visitor. Daniel's mother arrived, having driven across 3 states to meet the woman who brought my son back to life. "I owe you a thank you," she told Isabella privately. "Daniel smiled in his letters to me, but when I saw him today, he was actually happy. There's a difference." "He saved my life first," Isabella replied. "I'm just returning the favor." The evening ended with impromptu karaoke in their small living room, Emma directing everyone in increasingly elaborate performances. Daniel's mother provided backup vocals while Isabella surprised everyone with her knowledge of classic rock. This is what joy sounds like, Isabella thought, watching Daniel attempt to sing a duet with his daughter while his mother laughed until she cried. Later, as they cleaned up the chaos of a perfect family evening, Daniel's mother pulled him aside. "She's nothing like what I expected from a billionaire heiress." "What did you expect?" "Someone cold. Someone who'd never understand our world. Instead, I find someone who washes dishes and knows all the words to Emma's favorite songs." "Money doesn't determine character," Daniel said. "I learned that the hard way." "Are you happy, son?" "Really happy." Daniel looked through the kitchen doorway, where Isabella was helping Emma organize her art supplies, both of them laughing at some shared joke. "I didn't think I could be this happy again. I thought that part of my life was over. Your wife would be glad. She always said life was too short to waste on fear." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Daniel sat on the balcony looking at the leather bracelet his wife had given him. For years it had been a weight, a reminder of loss, of guilt, of love interrupted. Now it felt different, still meaningful, still connected to Sarah, but no longer heavy with grief. It had become a bridge between the love he'd had and the love he was building. Isabella joined him on the balcony, settling into the chair beside him. "Thinking about anything in particular?" she asked. "About how life surprises you. A year ago, if someone had told me I'd be planning a family vacation with a billionaire heiress who gave up her fortune for love, I'd have thought they were crazy. A year ago, if someone had told me I'd find my family by nearly drowning at a beach, I'd have said the same thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below them while their sunflowers swayed in the evening breeze. "Thank you," Isabella said softly, "for saving your life, for showing me what life is actually for." Final message: family isn't where you're born, but where you choose and choose again every single day. If this story touched you, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories. Real people, real choices, not mass-produced AI.